Dear brothers and sisters, the second Sunday of Lent invites us into a sacred movement of faith marked by listening, transformation, and mission. The liturgy places before us three powerful texts from Genesis, 2 Timothy, and Matthew. Together they form a spiritual itinerary that begins with Abraham's courageous departure, deepens through Paul's theology of suffering and grace, and culminates in the dazzling yet demanding mystery of the Transfiguration. Lent is never merely about climbing the mountain of prayer and penance. It is equally about coming down the mountain renewed for mission. The Church invites us to contemplate the passion of Jesus, always in the light of his resurrection. The glory glimpsed on the mountain prepares the disciples and us to face the scandal of the cross with hope. Christian discipleship is thus a rhythm, called out, strengthened within, and sent forth again. In a small village nestled among hills lived an elderly school teacher named Joseph. Every evening he climbed a nearby hill carrying an old lantern. The villagers often wondered why he made that tiring journey at his age. One day a young boy followed him. Reaching the top, Joseph lit the lantern and placed it on a rock overlooking the dark valley. The boy asked, "Master, why do you climb every day just to light a lamp no one sees?" Joseph smiled gently. "Long ago, when I was lost in a storm, I saw a small light on this hill. It guided me safely home. Since then, I come here every evening," said the teacher. The boy looked puzzled. "But you stay only a few minutes and then go back down." Joseph replied, "The hill gives me vision, but the village needs my presence. Light is not meant to stay on the mountain." Years later, when Joseph had died, the boy, now a grown man, took up the same lantern and the journey continued, losing one's own and gaining God's own. The call of Abraham in the book of Genesis marks one of the most decisive turning points in salvation history. The Hebrew imperative, lek leka, meaning go forth, carries a double force, leave behind and move toward. Abraham is summoned to abandon land, kinship, and inherited security, three pillars of ancient Near Eastern identity. This is not mere geographical relocation. It is theological displacement. God inaugurates a new era through holy detachment. Abraham must lose what is his own to receive what is God's own. The promise unfolds in layered blessings, land, descendants, and universal mediation of blessing. Significantly, Abraham departs without full clarity of destination, embodying faith as obedient trust rather than strategic planning. The relational dimension is equally striking. Those who bless Abraham will be blessed. Those who curse him will be cursed. This establishes election not as privilege but as missional responsibility. Through Abraham, God intends universal blessing. Pastorally, this text confronts our attachment to comfort zones, cultural, emotional, and spiritual. Lent asks us, what must we leave behind to enter God's promise? Sometimes discipleship requires the painful loss of familiar securities, status, habits, even self-constructed identities. Yet every authentic renunciation in God leads to deeper belonging in God. Share in suffering and the power of God. Paul offers Timothy and the church an interpretative key for Christian vocation. Share in suffering for the gospel by the power of God. The paradox is deliberate. Suffering is not glorified in itself. It becomes meaningful through divine empowerment. The passage is rich with theological catchwords. Called us to a holy calling, Kalesanthos Klese Hagia, reminds that vocation originates in God's initiative and not out of human merit. Not according to our works means that salvation is radically grace-driven. Before the ages began shows that the Christ event is rooted in God's eternal plan. manifested now points to salvation history reaching visible climax in Jesus. Abolished death indicates not mere postponement but decisive defeat. Brought life and immortality substantiates that the gospel unveils eschatological destiny. If Abraham's story was about setting out, Paul speaks of Christ setting in, God entering human history and human suffering. Christian suffering, therefore, is never isolated. It is participatory. To share in suffering for the gospel is to participate in the paschal pattern of Christ. For pastoral life in India and beyond, this message is deeply consoling. Many believers experience social pressure, misunderstanding, or quiet sacrifice in living their faith. Paul reminds us that suffering born in fidelity is not a sign of divine absence, but often of deeper communion with Christ's saving work. Seeing the vision and coming down the mountain. The Transfiguration is the luminous center of this Sunday. Matthew carefully structures the scene to reveal a progression of discipleship. Why Moses and Elijah? Their presence is profoundly symbolic. Moses represents the law, Elijah represents the prophets. Together, they signify the entire Old Covenant bearing witness to Jesus. Moreover, both figures had mysterious encounters with God on mountains, Sinai, Horeb, and both experienced unusual departures from earthly life. Their appearance confirms Jesus as the fulfillment of Israel's sacred history. Matthew narrates a series of moments that outline the disciples' experience. Delight points to what Peter wants to build, the tense, that is a desire to freeze the moment. Terrified explains the cloud and divine voice overwhelming the disciples. Compassion is highlighted when Jesus touches the lives of the disciples by saying, "Rise and have no fear." Descent is the process of disciples coming down the mountain with Jesus. Silence and obedience mark the duration. They keep the vision until after the resurrection. The Father's voice, "This is my beloved Son, listen to him," echoes the Shema of Israel, but now centers obedience on Jesus. Lent, therefore, is fundamentally about Christ-centered listening. Theologically, the meaning of coming down as the descent is as important as the vision. The mountain reveals glory, the valley demands fidelity. Jesus does not allow the disciples to remain in spiritual ecstasy. Authentic contemplation must lead to compassionate engagement. The interpretative key comes at the end. The vision can only be understood through the lens of death and resurrection. Without the cross, the transfiguration would be triumphalism. Without the resurrection, the cross would be despair. Together, they form the Christian mystery. Dear brothers and sisters, from Abraham's courageous departure through Paul's theology of grace-filled suffering to the disciples' transformative mountain experience, today's liturgy traces a single Lenten pathway, called out, strengthened within, and sent forth again. The theme before us, coming down the mountain with Christ, captures the heart of this Sunday. Faith is not escape but engagement. Prayer is not withdrawal but preparation. Glory is not possession but promise. As we continue our Lenten journey, the Lord gently asks each of us, what must I leave behind like Abraham? What suffering must I embrace in God's power like Paul? What mountain experience must I translate into daily discipleship? May we listen to the beloved Son, rise without fear when he touches us, and walk with him down the mountain, ready to bring his light into the valleys of our world. I thank you all for your patient listening and wish you a meaningful sacred journey during Lent.